I'd like to welcome you all to a field day sponsored by Sustainable Agriculture and Research and Education, North Central SARE, S-A-R-E, which you can find on the web, and also SDSU Extension and the South Dakota Grasslands Coalition. And we're being helped in our presentations today by Diane Narum, botanist from SDSU, a graduate student. Also Pete Bowman from SDSU Extension, our rangeland specialist. And today we're going to look at our grazing system, and we're going to talk about plant and animal health and how the populations of invertebrates like dung beetles and pollinators all contribute to cattle production and stability in the rangeland. So I hope you enjoy yourselves. And so, I knew that there were natural predators of flies, and I knew that dung beetles got rid of the dung, but I didn't put two and two together that we need the dung beetles to remove the manure so that we don't have huge fly problems. And I'm kind of ashamed it took me that long and that much money to find out, but now I know. And now I'm starting to look at dung beetles and try and figure out what they are doing for me, and then how I can make sure I still have them. It's really quite easy to still have them. There's not some of the chemicals that we use for cattle for other reasons, like to worm them in the fall and to do this and that. There's all kinds of alternatives out there, and it appears that there's only a few chemicals that are highly detrimental. So at least I can make that switch. And so the macrolytic lactones, Ivomec, Bimectin, there's quite a few different brand names, okay? Those are good chemicals in their proper use, but there are some chemicals that when they're used in the spring or in the pasture, they reduce the dung beetle populations. We also have other things that reduce the populations. We have different pasture management than these beetles evolved with. And I don't want to manage my pasture so the beetles can't survive either. So we're working on that variety of things. And now the next question is, how do you know if you have dung beetles in your pasture? And how do you know if you have a healthy population? That question just has not been answered in South Dakota. We don't even know what we should have. So I've worked on all these methods so that a producer can look at their own pasture or their friends or their clients and get an idea about what's there for dung beetles in an easy way and a valid way that's scientific enough to give you some good information. And then we can all start keeping track and we can all start managing for the beetles if we know how many we have and what types, because there's many different species to look for. We found that there were some plans from University of Missouri Extension, and they built this mechanical fly trap that traps horn flies mechanically, physically. The cattle walk through there and it captures them. And there's some in there right now because I did get the cattle through it in time for y'all to see that. And then there's other kinds of fly traps that help you with some other species. But now we're in the stage where we want to know what kind of dung beetles we have. If those dung beetles get rid of that manure in time to break up the fly life cycle, then you really should be made in the shade, shouldn't you? Because flies wouldn't be able to reproduce if the manure was gone. So these horn flies, they must have manure, and if that's gone, they're not going to cause you any trouble. And the only thing that gets rid of manure is invertebrates. We're not used to thinking of insects and worms and invertebrates as important. But just think about it. If all that manure from the last 5 years was here and not broken down, you wouldn't get the nutrients for your production of grass. You would have pests, and you'd have parasites of cattle. So if we can get rid of the manure using the dung beetles, they work for free, which is nice, then we have better parasite control. And we've done fecal tests of our cattle in this pasture, and they've come up with 0 3 years in a row. And then we tested calves. We tested 5 calves. Only one had coccidia, and it was rare. So now you start, if you have cattle and you think about some of those diseases, like coccidia, which there is no chemical control for that particular parasite of cattle. So you can use all the chemicals you want, you'll get absolutely nowhere with that. If these dung beetles help me get rid of that, wow, you think about the benefit to the cattle and to me and to the land right there for that one problem of coccidia, which is universal among cattle people actually. Some soil. Sure doesn't need golf anyone, huh? Okay, and then use that lever, see if it'll eject. So you gotta pull that lever up harder, I think. Oh. There you go. Watch your hand. Here, try putting it on the ground and then try pulling it up on that lever. There you go. I'm glad to get in contact with the entomologists and find out this is a tried and true method. They have a whole room in the ARS lab of light bulbs and cans with screens and funnels, and then they use a chemical at the bottom to preserve the specimens. And they have a whole room full of these cores sitting in cans, emptying their dung beetles into preservative. Yeah, it was quite amazing actually. Who has a room like that, right? So they're going to be finding out more.
Should you let it sit for a day or two to?
Well, this is one of the questions that are trying to be answered is when to sample, because there's entomologists have found that the first 24 hours has a certain group that come in, and then the next 24 hours, and at 72 hours, some populations of adults are peaking. And so that's one reason we got to get some methods figured out, because we don't know what day. Now, as we get farther down, there are some inert pats that Reba and I marked with their birthday. And I hardly recommend that's what you should do in your pastures. Use those little white cross fencing stakes, because you can write right on them. And then go ahead and mark the birthday of that pat and then watch it. So this manure in here is of known age, and this was from June 15th. And you know, if you look at it, it looks pretty old, but I mean, that's only 3 days ago. So it's, see, you can't guess. You just won't know if you guess. And then they take, it's about a 14-day turnaround on that. And all it takes is for the temperature of the pat to be changed by the activity of those dung community beetles. So because the horn flies need a certain temperature. That's why they don't hit us so hard right away. And some years we don't have hardly any horn flies. It's the weather. So it's quite possible to use a chemical or a feed through. Oh, it worked, but you don't know if it was the weather. Yeah, and so what the dung beetles do is they fill in. They act like the weather, and they change the temperature of that pat right away, and then it's no good to the larvae of the hornfly. So simple.
So the temperature is more important than the moisture level?
Apparently so, because there was no mention about the moisture level being a big deal. And you know, you wouldn't have hornflies out west if it was lack of moisture killed them. And you get everything hung so this light bulb shines on that core. That it makes the dung beetles migrate down away from the warmth and the dryness and the light. And I see I've got funnels down there. So they go down into the core, into the funnel, and on each funnel I've taped a little vial, but you can just put anything you want on the bottom. You've got some alcohol in there, and they fall in there and die and get preserved. And sterilized, which is okay too, because you don't want to play with them. You don't want to play with manure without, you know, good hygiene.
Have you seen any of the ones that roll them into balls?
Yes, I put out traps, which you can make out of actually got some around. make them out of a liter bottle, plastic bottle. You just cut the top off, flip it around so that it's like a funnel down, and you put some bait in there. And they'll fly down for the bait and not be smart enough to get out. So, dog poo's good. So I put some of my dog's poo in the trap. This is September of last year, which is late. And I caught 2 rollers, and I looked in the trap. I thought, well, there's nothing in there. And then I noticed that, oh, but something made tiny balls out of my dog's poo. And I thought, well, I bet it's a roller. So I brought that in and busted open the balls, and here there was a mature larvae in there already. And that did not take very many days. Or it was an adult that crawled inside the ball. I don't know. I don't think so. But you can trap.
And you bury that.
Yeah, and I buried it. Because if it's too hot, obviously that's not going to be the right natural environment. And
Linda, have you talked about, these beetles? They're quite good flyers, actually.
yeah,
so
that's our problem.
They're not they don't crawl around. I mean, they can easily fly into these traps and stuff. They're really good flyers.
And that makes it so if you think you put some manure in a bucket, and you bring it home and you don't cover that with a screen, you might lose your beetles and never get to see them. But this is great, just a learning tool to see what they look like, and it's not very difficult.
They're assuming most of what we have are native. Dung beetles, dung borers. If you talk about that, they're not. There was some thought that there was quite a few exotics that were brought in around here, but they're thinking that most of what they're finding and seeing is native. He said they were also really, with part of this project, Linda's site. If you see holes, that's positive. Whether they're the small holes or whether they're the BB size holes that indicate the beetles. And we talked about that at our last tour a little bit, and how that perforation not only can help control the insects that are undesirable, but also it allows that grass and stuff to move through, and that space. Think of all those manure pats out there. That space that grass can't grow until that breaks down. So the more it's perforated, the more that grass and those species can move through that and incorporate that into the soil. So.
And it's part of the whole.
Did you build that?
I had to hire the welding, and it's actually it's a little complex to build. Like, you need a real carpenter or someone who can read plans. Yep. Costs a lot of money, there's a lot of labor. And that's why, but this is an exact replica of the Missouri Extension construction. And I wanted to do exact replica because they tried theirs and it worked. This is the wave of the future here.
Is the plan online then for that thing?
Oh yeah, it is. It's on the SARS website, and then I'll send you a link to make sure you get at it, because sometimes those things move. So that is good, but it costs almost $5,000 to get it built, because there's a lot of materials, welding, carpentry. I mean, there's a lot to it. And so I'm working on this to try this out this summer too. This is using the same principles. And then I'll cover this so that all it is flies coming into screen, like these flies in here right now that got in there. They want to come up and out. So if I put slits in here like that, there's slits in the screens, and then cover this whole thing, it'll be a lot like that heavy box.
Now what is
But
that?
that would cost
spreading?
less. Pardon?
What is that you're spreading?
Well, so if they
It's just
they're in here and they come out, I need to trap them inside this 2 layers. In this machine here, call it a machine, we have 1 layer of screen with slits in it that they go through, and then another layer to trap them. And so there's no reason to me that we can't do it with a much lighter framework. And then it would be cost effective.